The drone was already in the air when I realized we were going to lose everything we had built, and I am telling you this so you understand that I knew. I knew at the moment the rotors lifted off the cobbles. I knew when my employer turned to the camera with his teeth bared in the grin that paid our salaries, and said into the warm gold light of a late afternoon on the forecourt of the house of Brackenmere, "Watch this. He can't move. He literally can't move. This is going to be our biggest video ever." And I knew, because I had been his producer for 2 years and 10 months, that he was about to do the thing 3 separate authorities had warned us, in writing, not to do. My name is not the one on the channel. My name was on the contracts, on the takedown notices, on the email from the city's aviation board that came at 9 the next morning. I am the producer. I was the producer. I do not work in that industry now, and I will not again. I am going to tell you about the 7 minutes on the forecourt of the house of Brackenmere, and the guardsman who did not move, and the small black quadcopter, and the way an entire career came down in the time it takes a polite man at a desk to read a published rule aloud. I will tell it straight, because I deserve no softer telling than the one we earned. The forecourt was full. It was a Saturday in the warm part of the year, the late afternoon sun on the gilded railings, the cobblestones the color of old honey, and perhaps 400 people moved in a slow circulating crowd around the iron line of the no-approach cordon. Tourists with phones, couples with phones, a school party with phones, everyone with a phone. That was the point. That was always the point. We had picked the hour specifically because the crowd would be large, the light would be on the guardsman's face, and the bearskin would catch the gold and look like something out of a film. The guardsman was on the inner post by the gilded gate. Red wool tunic, brass buttons, the bearskin tall and immaculate, white gloves, medals, the ceremonial rifle held at the rest. His eyes were forward on the cobbles 10 feet in front of his boots, and they did not move. I had been watching him through the viewfinder of the secondary camera for about 20 minutes because we had been setting up the shot, and in 20 minutes I had not seen him blink in a way I could pick out on the screen. He stood the way a wall stands. He breathed the way a sleeping man breathes. He was, to look at, a piece of the architecture. My employer was 26 years old. I will not give you his name. He had 11 million followers on the platform, 3 sponsorship deals, a contract with a talent agency, and a small management team of which I was the most senior. He had built the channel on what he called reaction content, which meant approaching people in public places and provoking them until they did something he could film. He had been warned twice by the agency. He had been warned once by the platform final notice. And he had been warned, in a formal letter I had signed for at the studio door 3 weeks earlier, by the city's aviation board, that the airspace within a defined radius of the principal royal residences was a restricted zone, and any unauthorized flight of an unmanned aerial vehicle inside it would be treated as a Class B aviation offense. The letter was on my desk. I had read it to him. He had laughed. They won't do anything, they send a letter. And then the cordon is a line on the ground. The sky belongs to whoever puts a thing in it. That was the sentence I thought of when the rotors lifted off the cobbles. He had the drone in his right hand and his phone in his left, and he was streaming live to his audience, and he was holding the phone so the camera caught both his face and the guardsman's, and he was talking the whole time. "All right," he said in the warm, easy tone of a man who has been told for years that everything he does is wonderful. "All right, you've all been asking, you've all been begging. We are finally doing the Bearskin challenge. We are getting up close and personal with one of the most famous statues in the world. He is not allowed to move. He is not allowed to react. Let's see how close we can get." He let the drone rise. It was a small black quadcopter, the kind you can buy at any electronics shop, with a high-definition camera on a gimbal underneath and a set of rotors no bigger than a man's thumb. It made a high, thin whine like an insect amplified through a small speaker. It climbed to about 8 feet, hung there, and then drifted on his thumb on the control stick, across the line of the no-approach cordon and over the cobbles toward the guardsman's post. The crowd noticed. The whine of the drone was louder than the murmur of 400 people, and heads turned and phones came up, and a sort of slow-held breath went around the forecourt that I have heard, in retrospect, on 20 different recordings shot by 20 different witnesses, and that I will not forget. The crowd in that moment was filming the man who was filming the guardsman. There were, when we counted later, 273 separate videos of what happened next, uploaded within the first hour, before our own channel had finished processing the live stream. He flew the drone to within 3 feet of the guardsman's bearskin. The guardsman did not move. "Look at this," my employer said, delighted, into his own phone. "Look at this guy, total statue, total absolute statue. I'm going to get closer. I'm going to get right in his face." He brought the drone down to head height and forward until the rotors were perhaps 18 inches from the front of the bearskin, and he hovered it there. The high, thin whine was loud now. You could see the fur of the bearskin stir very slightly in the rotor wash. The guardsman's eyes were forward. The guardsman did not blink. "He can't do anything," my employer said. "He literally can't do anything. He's not allowed. This is the rule. He can't speak, he can't move, he can't react. This is the easiest content I have ever filmed." He moved the drone very slowly in a slow arc around the front of the bearskin, the rotors stirring the fur on one side and then the other, the high whine drilling into the warm gold afternoon. The guardsman's eyes did not move. His chest rose and fell at the same rate it had risen and fallen for the 20 minutes I had been watching him. His white-gloved hand on the rifle did not tighten. A muscle in his jaw did not flicker. He was, to look at, the same piece of the architecture he had been before the drone left the cobbles. The crowd was silent now. 273 phones held up at chest height. A woman in a sun hat had her mouth slightly open. A man in a business suit was, I noticed in one of the later videos, on his own phone, looking up at the drone and then down at the phone, his face the face of a man placing a call to an authority. My employer brought the drone in closer. The rotors were, at that moment, approximately 6 inches from the front of the guardsman's bearskin. You could see in the high-definition footage that became, within 48 hours, the evidence in the City Aviation Board's case file, the individual hairs of the bearskin's fur lifting and falling in the rotor wash. You could see the brass of the chin strap buckle catch the gold light. You could see the guardsman's eyes perfectly forward, perfectly still, the pupils not adjusting, the lids not flickering. "Tell me," my employer said into his phone, grinning, "tell me this guy isn't the easiest mark in the world. Tell me. He's a statue, he's a literal statue, he can't do a single thing about it." That was the sentence the platform safety team played back twice, in the hearing the following Tuesday. That was the sentence the talent agency's lawyer read aloud slowly into the conference room phone, while his own face went the color of cold ash. That was the sentence the city's aviation board excerpted in the formal complaint as evidence of intent to flout published restrictions for the purpose of self-promotion. That was the sentence that ended us. I will tell you what the guardsman did. The guardsman did nothing. He stood his post. He did not raise his rifle. He did not turn his head. He did not address the man with the drone. He did not address the crowd. He did not, in the 7 minutes during which the drone hung in the air within arm's reach of his face, give the man what the man had come for. The thing the man had come for was a reaction. The thing the man got instead was the absence of one. I did not understand at the time what that absence was. It was a wall. It was a man trained for a long time to stand exactly where he had been told to stand and not to give, for anything short of a threat to life, the thing the boy with the drone wanted him to give. It was not stillness because he could not move. It was stillness because he would not. And the difference between those two things was the difference between the career my employer had at 6 minutes past 4 in the afternoon and the career he did not have at 1 minute past 4 on the day after. At 7 minutes past 4, 4 men in dark plain suits walked without hurry from the small archway at the inner corner of the forecourt, across the cobbles to the line of the no-approach cordon. They were palace security. They had been watching from the moment the rotors lifted off the cobbles. They had been waiting in the patient way of professionals for the precise moment at which the drone was unambiguously inside the no-fly cordon, on camera in the presence of several hundred witnesses, with the man at the controls speaking aloud on a live broadcast, his name and the name of his channel and the explicit intent of his act. They had been waiting, in other words, for him to do exactly what he had now done. They came across the cordon line. They were polite. The first of them said in a level voice, "Sir, please bring the aircraft down. You are operating an unmanned vehicle inside a restricted zone." My employer turned with the phone still in his left hand, the grin still on his face, and said, "I'm filming, hold on, I'm filming." The man in the dark suit said, "Sir, bring the aircraft down, now." The grin slipped by a small fraction, because something in the voice of the man in the dark suit was a thing my employer had not heard. In his 11 million followers and his 3 sponsorship deals and his 2 years and 10 months of standing in public places saying things to strangers before. He brought the drone down. He brought it down clumsily because his hands had begun at last to shake. The drone landed on the cobbles. The high thin whine cut off. The forecourt was for one full second completely silent. Then the man in the dark suit said, "Sir, please come with us." And my employer, with the phone still streaming, looked at the camera and said, in a tone he had never used on his channel before, in a small, uncertain voice that none of his 11 million followers had ever heard, "Wait, wait, you can't do this. I have rights, I have rights." They walked him across the cobbles to the small archway. The crowd watched. 273 phones followed him. The guardsman did not move. The guardsman did not look. The guardsman stood his post, eyes forward on the cobbles 10 feet in front of his boots, and his chest rose and fell at the same rate it had risen and fallen for the previous half hour, and he was, to look at, the same piece of the architecture he had been when we arrived. The live stream cut out at the archway. The platform took it down at 6:14 that evening. By then it had been mirrored in whole or in part on every major site by every major news desk in the country, and on perhaps 20,000 individual accounts, and the high-definition crowd footage had begun to surface alongside it, from a dozen angles, showing the same 7 minutes with the audio from the live stream synced over the top. By midnight the hashtag was a top trend. By morning the city's aviation board had opened a formal case, citing as Exhibit A the high-definition footage from my employer's own gimbal-mounted camera, which had recorded in perfect resolution the rotor wash on the bearskin's fur, the distance from the front of the cordon, and the audio of the operator naming himself, his channel, and his intent. His own video was the evidence. I do not think he ever understood that. I think, on the way down to the archway with the 4 men in the dark suits, in the small, uncertain voice he used on the live stream when he said he had rights, he still believed somewhere under the surface that the footage was going to save him. The footage was the thing he had built his career on. The footage was the thing that paid the rent. The footage was, in his mind, the proof of his own importance. He did not understand, then or for some time after, that the footage was now the proof of something else entirely. The cascade was clean and fast. The platform suspended the channel at 9 the next morning, then converted the suspension to a permanent ban at 3, citing the final notice letter on file. The beverage company terminated at 10, the watch company at 11, the clothing line at 1. The agency sent a written notice of contract termination at 2. The city's aviation board filed its formal complaint at 3. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday. He attended it with a lawyer he had hired that morning. The lawyer, who was a good one, read the file for 2 hours and then sat down with him at 11 past noon and said, in the level tone of a man who had been in his business a long time, "Your own footage is the case." The guard did not react. "There is no provocation we can construct. You flew a drone in his face. You said on your own audio that you knew he could not respond. I can save you the fine if you plead. I cannot save the channel, the contracts, or the platform. They are gone." They were gone. I left the company the day after the hearing. I gave back the laptop and the phone and the access cards and the keys to the studio, and I walked out into the bright, clean morning, and I stood for a long moment at the curb, and I thought about the 7 minutes on the forecourt of the House of Brackenmere, and the guardsman who had not moved. I have thought about him often in the months since, not about my employer whose name no longer trends and who is, I am told, working at his uncle's logistics firm, about the guardsman, about what it must take to stand for 7 minutes inside the high, thin whine of a drone 6 inches from your face with a rich, loud boy goading you in front of 400 people, and to give him nothing, not a flinch, not a tightened hand, not a turned eye. Not the smallest gift of a reaction that would have made him, in his own eyes, real. I think I understand it now. I did not at the time. The guardsman knew, in the way a man who has been on his post a long time knows, that the boy with the drone was a small problem, and that the law that stood behind him was a large one, and that the large one would arrive in its own time, in its own way, walking calmly across the cobbles in dark suits, and that the only thing required of him was to be there when it did, exactly as he had been there when it had not yet arrived. His stillness was not absence. His stillness was a kind of waiting that I had never seen a man do before, and that I will probably not see a man do again. The last thing I will tell you is a detail I read in a sidebar of the hearing transcript, which the agency's lawyer let me see on the afternoon I cleaned out my desk. The relief came onto the post at 6 o'clock that evening, an hour and 3/4 after my employer was walked to the archway. The handover was the standard one. The guardsman who had been on the post stepped off it. He walked at the formal pace across the forecourt to the inner door and went inside. He went down to the guard room, took off the bearskin, set it on its block, sat down on the bench, and drank, the witness statement said, 1 cup of tea. Then he stood up and went to find his sergeant, and made his report, 3 sentences long, of an unauthorized aerial vehicle in the cordon at 16:00 hours, and an arrest by palace security at 16:07. That was the whole of it on his end. He had stood his post, he had given the boy nothing. The boy had given the system everything it needed to end him, on his own audio, in his own video, in his own voice. The guardsman had gone in and drunk a cup of tea and made his report and gone home. I think about that cup of tea more than I think about anything else from that week. I think about it because it is the measure, for me, of how small the man with the drone was, and how large the man with the bearskin was, and how completely we had misjudged, in our studio with our cameras and our sponsorship deals and our 11 million followers, which of the two of them held the weight in the world. It was not us, it was him, it had always been him. We had simply, until the 7 minutes were over, been too loud to hear it. I do not work in that industry now, and I will not again. I take, when I can, a walk past the forecourt of the House of Brackenmere in the late afternoon, and I stand at the back of the crowd, and I watch the guardsman on the inner post by the gilded gate. He stands the way a wall stands. He breathes the way a sleeping man breathes. He is, to look at, a piece of the architecture. I am, these days, learning to be quiet enough to hear him.